Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel English Literature with Sumi. So as promised by me, I am here with the second part of Anglo Saxon period or Old English period. So in this video, I am going to discuss about how modern English came into being and what are the literary features of the Anglo Saxon period and how poetry and who are the writers actually who wrote in this period. So do watch the video till the end in order to know what kind of literature prevailed at that period. I will be making a separate video on the prose section of the Anglo-Saxon period because if I combine poetry and prose, it would not be easy for you to understand. So I thought that why not make a separate video for the prose and what developments took place in the Anglo-Saxon period. So this video is all about poetry and the major writers or the major poets of the period. So let's get started. As you can see the chart in front of you, how modern English came into being. It is very important to know how and in what way the development of English began and from which languages did our present day English came into being. So let us see. So first of all we have the Indo-European, which is the parent language. Indo-European can be divided into many languages, out of which primitive Germanic is one such language. Primitive Germanic can again be divided into three parts or three languages: Gothic, Scandinavian and West Germanic. Now West Germanic can again be divided into three parts or three languages: Old High German, Old Low German and Anglo Saxon. Now Old High German, and from Old High German we have German language, from Old Low German we have the Dutch language, and of course Anglo Saxon and Old English we have Middle English and then the Modern English. So modern English is the present day English or the standard version of our English that we use today. So this is how our English came into being. I have added this chart because before knowing what kind of things does Old English have within it or what literature was prevalent at that time, it is important to know how modern English came into being in order to relate Old English with modern English. Now let us see how Old English came into being and where was there no language at that point of time in Britain when the invaders, that is Anglo Saxons and Jutes, came to invade Britain or England. So the earliest inhabitants were Britons and the tongue they spoke was a form of Celtic. After the descendants of the Anglo Saxons and Jutes from North Germany, the Celtic supremacy came to an end because the people of Britain, after the invaders came into their land, they began to be counted in minority, and the Anglo Saxons and Jutes they became a majority. So the Celtic supremacy slowly began to crumble down. Then what did the Britons do? The Britons fled into the hills of Wales, Cornwall and Scotland where their language was preserved. Now for any particular group of people, it is very important to preserve their language. If you cannot preserve your language, your identity will also be faded one day. So it is better to preserve your language, and it is of utmost importance for any group or any person to preserve his or her language in order to secure their identity. So the Britons, they had no other way but to fled away from that place in order to preserve their language, and they could preserve their language in the hills of Wales, Cornwall and Scotland. So in this way, the tongue of the invaders, so after the Britons fled down, the tongue of the invaders became the tongue of Britain or England. So earlier it was customary to name it as Anglo Saxon, that is the language of invaders, but the more usual term today is Old English, which we know it as. So Old English is not only one form of language, but there are many dialects in Anglo-Saxon or Old English period, out of which Wessex, that means West section, became most important. Its importance can be determined by two factors. Firstly, because of its high civilization, and secondly, because most literature written in the Anglo-Saxon period was written in this dialect. Then let us see the features of the Old English language. For any person to know better the literary features, we first need to know the features of the language itself. So the first feature is that it is very difficult to read, as it is different from the language that we use today. Now if we get a manuscript of Old English today, we won't be able to read it because it is completely different from the English that we are using today. Then secondly, most part of its vocabulary is native, but there are borrowings from other languages as well. Now the vocabulary of any language is its most important part. Now in Anglo-Saxon, what happened is that most part of it is native, that is from their own origins, but there are also borrowings from other languages like French, Scandinavian and Latin as well. So there are most part is native, but the borrowings are from other languages. Then the third point is that the grammar shows more elaborate verbal system than that of today. So in Anglo-Saxon period, the grammar that they use was of a more elaborate system than the grammar that we use today. As I have already told you that there are many dialects in the Anglo-Saxon, let us see how many and what are the types of dialects. Actually, there are 4 main dialects: Northumbrian, Kentish, Mexican and West Saxon. Now West Saxon, as I have told you, it became a standard. Now 2 types of literature were prevailing at that time in Anglo-Saxon age or Anglo-Saxon period. First is the pagan. Pagan or pagan language or pagan literature are basically poetry brought by the Anglo-Saxons in the form of oral sagas. They brought it with them when they came from North Germany to invade Britain or England. And secondly, it is Christian literature. These consist of writings developed under the teachings of the monks. Then, after the coming of Christianity, had a great impact on the language. Which language? Anglo-Saxon language. It is like the wealth of a new language, and its effect can be seen clearly in early prose and poetry. So, the influence of Christianity is of utmost importance while studying Anglo-Saxon language. We will get to know how it influenced the writers as well. But as we can see, there are 2 forms, pagan and Christian. Pagan poetry can be pagan poetry are those poetry brought by Anglo-Saxons with them, and Christian are those developed under the teachings of the monks. Now let us see the literary features of the period. Now pagan origins. Poems associated with the pagan past, in particular Widsith and Beowulf. Then we have literature from anonymous origins as well. There are many poems of anonymous origin. Anonymous origin means their writer is unknown and they do not have a clear authorship as well. Then imitative quality. Much of the prose and poetry is translated or adapted from Latin works of translation. These include books of Bible, lives of saints, etc. In some, the material is reshaped with comments and expansion. Now, as you can see, the 4th division of the literary features of the period is the manuscript. So, a small portion of Old English poetry is survived, which is representative 4 manuscripts prevailed or are preserved. They are the Beowulf manuscript containing Beowulf and Judith. Then we have the Junius manuscript containing the Kadmanian poems. Kadman is a writer of the period. Then we have the Exeter book containing 2 signed poems of Cynewulf. Then we have the Versilli book containing 2 signed poems of Cynewulf. Now Cynewulf and Kadman, they are the writers of this period. Now let us come to the poetry. Now if we are discussing about poetry, it would be a mistake on our part not to discuss Beowulf as it is the first poetry of the Anglo Saxon period. Now its theme is continental Germanic. I have written here the features of the Beowulf poem. Its theme is continental Germanic. Its actual authorship is unknown because it is not signed. There are elements of Christianity which can be found in the extant version, not in the original version, but in the modified version. Now, dialect is West Saxon, but there is clear evidence of some Anglican dialect, but it is uncertain whether it is Mercian or Northumbrian. But the dialect is West Saxon, there is no doubt in that, but there are also evidences of some other Anglican dialect like Northumbrian and Mercian, which is not clear which one. Then the language of the poem is forceful. It is very forceful and expressive. There is use of repetition and variation in the poem, and if you read the poem, it is rhythmical, that is, the verse is rhythmical, and throughout the poem you can see that same idea is expressed more than once through different words. So these are the features of the first poetry in Anglo-Saxon period, which is Beowulf. Now apart from Beowulf, we have other poetry as well. Firstly, the pagan poems. They are distinctly secular. Some of them are composed in 10th century. Widsith, the Fur Traveller, is the oldest poem in the language, but it has little poetical significance. Then we have Waldeer. It consists of 2 fragments, 63 lines in all, about the exploits of Walter of Aquitaine. It has vigor and power and would have been one of the finest narrative pieces if more than what is preserved we would have found it. Then we have a poem on the Battle of Brunei, on the famous battle which took place in 1937 between Athelstan, King of England, and an alliance of Olaf, Githfalstan, King of Dublin, Constantine II, King of Scotland, Owen, and King of Stateside. Then again a poem on the fight of Finnsburg. It is a fragment of some 48 lines describing the fighting at Finnsburg. Then we have Battle of Maldon, about the battle which took place in 1993. This particular poem on the battle is significant for the sentiments expressed by warriors. So, in pagan poems, we have poems like Widsith, Waldeer, the Battle of Brunei, then the fight at Finnsburg, and the Battle of Maldon. These are all the pagan poems that we can find in the Anglo-Saxon period. The next part of the other poetry is the elegies. These elegies, they appear in the Exeter book. There is no connection between individual pieces, that means no connection between individual poems, but they do display similar qualities like meditative in character along with other characteristics. So the elegies include the wanderer, the seafarer, wife's lament, husband's message. Then the third part of poetry, that is the section of other poetry, is the Kadman Group. Now Kadman is a writer, as I have already told you. Now this group, it includes poems of Kadman and Bede. Bede is another writer. Now both the writers' works dealt in Northumbrian literature, which base is Christian, and its center was the monasteries and abbeys. Now, as I have already told you that Christianity or the influence of Christianity was very important for the Anglo Saxon period, and this can be seen in the works of these writers because their base is Christian and they had learned whatever they know of Christianity from the monasteries and abbeys. Now, first let us see in detail about Kadman, the writer. Now, Kadman belonged to the 7th century. He is called the Anglo Saxon Milton. But we know very little of him, and whatever we know of him, we know it from Bede's account. So, Kadman's greatest work is Paraphrase, which includes Genesis, Exodus, Daniel, and 3 short poems which can be considered under one title, Christ and Satan, and are of unequal merit. Unequal merit means they cannot be compared. That means these poems cannot be compared with any other poem of this period. They had excellence in them. So the title Christ and Satan is itself showing that the influence of Christianity in the writers. Now let us move on to the other writer, that is Bede. He lived from 673 to 735. He is a great scholar and he is known as the father of our English learning. But he wrote almost exclusively in Latin. His works were over 40 in number and were widely copied as books or manuscripts in all the monastery schools of Europe. So he is famous for his because he wrote the first history of England, which is the ecclesiastical history of the English people. This history, it has a curious combination of accurate scholarship and immense credulity. So, Bede's history is the first history that was written on England. Then we have the Cynewulf Group, which is the fourth and the last part of poetry. That is Cynewulf, he belonged to the 8th century and he is the only one of our early poets who signed his works. And because he signed his work, we could know that which poems actually belonged to him. He signed works in Runic. Runic means Germanic language, are Juliana, Eileen, Christ, the faiths of the apostles. He had also unsigned works, that means some works were ascribed to him. We don't know the truth whether they actually belong to him or not. But these include Andreas, Phoenix, The Dream of the Rood, The Descent into Hell, etc. There are many others. And these signed works are more scholarly than the Kadman poems, which are not signed, and they had a great power of expression and technique. These works, that is the works of Cynewulf, they probably was written in the 9th century.
So I hope it's all clear now regarding poetry and the major poets of the period. So if you want to know more about the Anglo-Saxon period and the prose part especially, so do not forget to subscribe to my channel in order to get the latest updates regarding the history of English literature. And not only the history of English literature, I will be dealing with everything related to English literature. So if you are interested in English literature, do not forget to subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon, and don't forget to like, comment and share this video with your friends.